question. Following from what you were saying, one of the questions that you kind of touched on was regarding the future generations and becoming a good ancestor to the future. And you've mentioned, in that regard, you've mentioned the resources that the previous generations hold, and how our task is to start seeing them, to start seeing what the resources are, so that we can start receiving them, so that then they can flow forwards into the future. So my question is around what if you can share a little simple ritual or ceremony or exercise, I don't know, some sort of simple way that anyone, even if they've never seen a constellation before, could start accessing those resources, maybe could start building that relationship with their ancestors and seeing them in a different way.
Sure. Look, the very first thing I always suggest to people, and it depends on the client, I'm going to give you two options. There's the option that I always suggest as an initial, and that is creating a space in your home that is a place for your ancestors. So in a way, just by creating a space, you're inviting them. And as soon as you invite them, in these traditions, the idea is that you thank and you ask. It's kind of basic. I mean, a basic for many traditions. In prayer, in patla, you say thank you for what you received and you ask for what you need. And so by creating a place, you're saying you're welcome. So what that means is really and it's important that you choose this place, that it's not in your bedroom. So we don't like to put our ancestors in a place where we have relations or where we have sex. The idea is just simply that, that's private and it's not something that we do in front of our ancestors. So the idea would be to somewhere in your living room or in your private space, just to put up a little, a candle and maybe a few objects that represent, and you can work with that and build it. To put pictures of your grandparents, your great-grandparents, it's really up to you. It's just literally creating a symbolic place that they then have a space in your home, and you can go to it and you can say hi and you can greet. And you can ask and you can thank. So that's a very sort of simple version of it. I mean, it can get a lot more complicated, but really one can keep it very simple with a candle and some photos. I think in some cultures, this is just an obvious thing that you do, but I think in many Western cultures, we've totally forgotten this idea. So that would be the first thing. And then what I invite people to do is, as they start to connect to various resources or strengths or gifts that they may receive from their ancestors. And this sometimes just comes in almost synchronous moments, like you'll be cleaning up your house and then you'll find a photograph of somebody. As soon as you start connecting to your ancestors find ways to connect to you as well. And they do it in whatever ways that they can, whether it's photographs or sort of synchronous meetings with people in the park. I mean, maybe it's a bit more difficult in lockdown to have those synchronous moments, but they'll find a way. And then to put objects that represent those gifts and those resources onto this place of the ancestors, so that you can remember. It's like, oh yeah, we use stones, we use figures, you can do anything, leaves, little bits and pieces from nature. It's so deeply personal. Everybody's relationships with their ancestors, it's a deeply personal process, and it's really just following. There's some basic rules, like the bedroom, and also sort of going there in a respectful and reverent way. And then the other sort of option, for those of you that are not into the sort of the more ritual way of working, so it depends on my clients. Sometimes I have, CEOs of companies who really, that's not their scene, they're not interested. Then we just do a list. We just do a list write down your mother, write down your father, your grandfather, and your grandmother, and what qualities would you like? What are their beautiful qualities, or what are their and yes, you could, your mind might go into all the terrible things that they did, and but it's a real exercise to work out what actually were they good at, and then list that, and then just keep that there somewhere, so that you really and in a way you can thank them for those qualities, because it's possible for you to switch them on in yourself. No. I mean, you have more access to them if your ancestors had those qualities than if they didn't. The rest of us may have to work extra hard for some of those things, you know. So that's an easy way to connect and to open up the channels, and just being grateful for what it is that you did receive. Yeah.
Thank you so much for it. It sounds really exactly what I wanted. Not that what I wanted to hear, but you know, it sort of exactly answers the question. It's simple, and not necessarily requires any special learning experience and things. And as you said, deeply personal. So this is perfect. Thank you. Following on something you mentioned, and this might be a slightly challenging question in some way. You've mentioned that you wouldn't put ancestors into your bedroom because there are things there that you do that are deeply private, and you don't want them in the same space, which kind of makes me question whether there is an exclusion of some sort happening of the sexuality of the human being. And I imagine all ancestors know what it means because we're here. So at least once they've been through that experience and, you know, passed the life on. So I'm wondering why in this tradition you would separate the two. I mean, I understand why, but I'm curious about a bit more what stands behind that.
You know, sometimes you just, this is a tricky one, because sometimes in the, which is part of the reason, part of the reason why some of the sort of traditional stuff is quite difficult, because sometimes there are just rules that you follow, and there are exclusions that you follow, because that's how it is. In constellation work, we say to children that this has got nothing to do with you, this thing that's between your parents. It's a little bit the same. It's just in the other direction. So your ancestors wouldn't do this in front of you because it's got nothing to do with you. This is between adults, and you are the children. So out of respect, we also don't do it in front of them. That's the kind of understanding, in my understanding of it. Yeah. So it's not about excluding sexuality in any way. I mean, I don't think that's the idea at all. It's about certain ways of approaching, behaving, and speaking to elders that are respectful. So, you know, a lot of people rebel against this because it is quite rule-based, and it is quite patriarchal, and it's difficult for me as well in you know, living in South Africa and watching the sort of patriarchal aspect of these things, but it feels right to me, you know, this rule. So when I've set up my own ancestral shrine, which I have behind me over there by the fireplace, fireplace is always a really good place to do your place for the ancestors. It didn't feel right at all to do it in my bedroom. So maybe if you don't like the idea of being told this thing, it's to test it out, to walk around and feel in your body, where does it feel right? Okay, so now you know, I've said maybe not in the bedroom, but really test it out. If you're very convinced that it should be in the bedroom, then you need to work with what you need to work with. I mean, I think it's a tricky one, because there's it's again, it's this thing of, do we follow the ancient rules and trust that they're there for a reason, or do we just want to do our own thing? And if you are really listening to your ancestral communications, I get a feeling they might not be so keen on it being in your bedroom. But I'm all for people finding their own way and really working with their own inner wisdom.